Hey, I'm Jade, and today I'm going to talk you through my recovery journey. I am going to talk a lot about the difficult years as well, everything I went through. I think I haven't done this for a while. I definitely shared my journey maybe a year ago, maybe a bit sooner, but I just think it's nice to check in with you guys. If you've ever seen my content on this channel before, I like to share bits about my past, how I suffered with OCD so you can feel less alone, and also how I got better and how I'm doing today. I think it's really important for us to hear from others who we can relate to and see how they're doing today, how they got better, so that we've got hope. I know that I had a lot of people that I felt inspired by. For example, there was someone I knew called Erica who was way better than I was, and she had reached recovery from the same themes as me. And I met her as part of this group of people, this network, and I always remembered all of the things she said to me. There's also some people that I really get on well with still today as well, who have been through the exact same journey, and we're in touch, and it's just so nice to be in contact with these people who I've been on the same journey with. So hope I can be that for you. And yeah, I'm going to share some tips along the way too. So my journey with OCD started basically for as long ago as I can remember. I don't remember necessarily suffering from OCD as a small child, but I don't remember a time where I didn't feel highly anxious and highly scared pretty much most of the time. Being scared was my default position as a child. So the first recollection I have of feeling very anxious and sick and nauseous is about the age of 3. My parents are not together, and I remember when my dad would pick me up, I'd feel this OCD anxiety type feeling. So it wasn't just like anxious, it was a genuine, the feeling you would get now if you're super triggered. I would just feel like all the like blood rush out my body and just feel really sick and upset. And like, I love my dad, he's amazing, but as a child it was just all new and scary. And so this is just to illustrate that I don't remember not feeling anxious. It's really weird. So when I've arrived at a place in my grown-up life where life has felt a lot more like how someone without OCD would live, it's been a really surreal experience, because I haven't ever been able to relate to people who say, I want to get back to how I was before OCD, because I don't really have a before OCD. So obviously that example I gave as a 3-year-old is not when OCD self kicked in. I felt really anxious. I always struggled with my eating. From like age 6, I remember if I was scared about like natural disasters or like the sound of wind, I thought there'd be a hurricane, as I was starting to learn about the world and how things worked. I remember looking at people eating food and thinking, how could you eat so much food? You know, I would eat a few nibbles and just feel really ill and anxious and nauseous and funny. So that was always something for me, was that when I felt anxious, eating was a problem. And that followed me right the way through. You'll be pleased to know I eat ridiculous amounts of food now, and that does not affect me. So yeah, today is a lot different. And then I would say that OCD, the first actual OCD experience I had was being in the cinema when I was maybe 9 with my brothers and my dad and stepmom. And the film had just started, and I had this flashing intrusive image of like the screen exploding. And that also then correlated with an image I'd seen of like when there's like a like a nuclear bomb has gone off, and all the people were like, I think it was like frozen or some, I can't remember what it was, but it was a really distressing image I'd seen. And I kept having this intrusive image of that happening to us. And so I kept measuring the distance between myself and the fire exit in a really compulsive way. I was desperate to know, would I make it out in time, looking for signals of something going wrong with the screen, looking at everybody else, making sure who's going to get out first. I'd asked to swap with my dad to sit near the exit. I think I left quite a few times thinking, well, if it happens now, at least I'm in the toilets. And then I got loads of guilt that I was leaving my family behind. So this is not a theme that carried on with me, like natural disaster threats. But as a young child, that's where it first latched. This then moved into being like 10, 11, where if I even heard anything about war on the news. So when I was 10, it was like the mid to late 90s, it was like the late 90s. So there was a lot of talk about war going on, and I would just be so distressed. I would have to stop eating. I would be sick. I'd have extreme panic attacks. And I just remember asking desperately for reassurance to my mum about like, is there going to be a volcano in Wales? Yeah, she's like, there isn't a volcano in Wales, so there can't be a volcano eruption in Wales. And I'd be like, yeah, but what if? somehow there was one, what if one came out of the ground? Like, that's how far I would need to go. That's pretty scary as a child because you don't really have like any form of rational brain anyway, so it was quite scary. And then it just started to move into more like difficult themes. I grew up, I remember it hit me like a ton of bricks when I had an intrusive POCD, harm OCD type thought. I think I was about 14, and it literally, I just had a flashing image of something that I'd seen and it came back to me. And I remember thinking that was when OCD hit in the worst way. That was the moment that you can probably relate to, which was like, life will never be the same again. I can't go back from this. So it was very different than earlier experiences of OCD that were perhaps more upsetting in the moment but went away. This was like locked on. You will never be able to not think that. And this must mean something about you. How could you have an image in your brain and there's something wrong with you? And then it scoured my whole life for like past what I, what I was, could be capable of, who I was as a person. And that just like from the age of 14 to 18, that locked more and more tightly, like every few months, until it just became like an absolute state. And confessing to parents, like panicking, everyone saying, Jade, there is nothing wrong with you. Like, what are you talking about? Everyone has strange thoughts. Just constantly panicking about the past, whether I was a bad person, whether I'd done anything wrong, and just constant. And it was, if you've been there, you can relate to how unbelievably terrifying these life conditions are. Just that constant guilt, constant anxiety. And I've said a few times on this channel that, I can't remember who said it, but someone, I think it was Jade Chataway, a girl who shared her POCD recovery story on the internet that I found years ago. And she said that the feeling, oh no, it was the girl from, she did a BBC series. I can't even remember her name now. I'm really sorry. But there was a girl who did the series called Pure on BBC. And she said that when you have harm OCD, you feel like there is a body buried in your back garden that only you know about, and any second the police are going to knock the door because they found you out. That's like the most accurate description I've ever heard anyone talk about this type of OCD. So I lived like that for ages and ages and ages. I had gaps where I was happy, where I was working, because my happy place was escapism and working in my job that I absolutely adore and adore to this day. And so for me, it was just like buried into my computer, working furiously, trying to get the thoughts out of my mind, and then just sleeping, eating. I'd have a few drinks on the weekend to forget. And that's how I lived and survived until like the age of 25. And I got to a place where my life was so boxed in that I couldn't walk certain routes, because if I even saw an image of a trigger, I'd be in absolute pieces, in bed sick for days and days and days, and I would just break down. So I was doing great as long as I did not see anything that even linked to a trigger. And me and Sam were talking about this on Real Talk on the channel not long ago. Me and Sam were saying that literally had the same thing, where it got so bad that work was our safe place. But even if someone had like a word or a picture on a mug or a photo of their child or their loved one, or we saw a newspaper headline in the canteen, or anything that would even link to our themes, if we saw that at work, that's it. Got to go home, sick, freaking out. And that's how bad it can get. And that's why avoidance is never the answer, because what happens with avoidance is it grows. You start scanning more. And I used to do this. I would scan the room as I entered, like look around, what's the threat? And the problem is, the more that you avoid these threats rather than moving towards them, the more it's going to grow, because smaller things will stand out to you because you're kind of looking harder for them. So when I got to 25, I had a severe breakdown. I had an it was almost like my body said, you can't carry on like this. By the way, I didn't know I had OCD at this point. I'd never had any therapy. I'd lived my whole life undiagnosed, thinking there was something wrong with me, wanting these weird thoughts to go away, thinking I was a bad person. And I had the biggest breakdown ever. I went on a big night out, had loads to drink, was running away from my thoughts. I think we've all been there on those type of nights where you think, if I just have a few drinks and don't see any triggers, I'm going to feel fine. And I just had a crazy night where it seemed like really fun at the time. And then I got too drunk, and then I made this big mistake. And then, so this all linked in with my ROCD as well, because what had happened was not only was I suffering extremely badly from harm OCD, but my now husband had proposed to me, and my ROCD was absolutely in overdrive. So it was like 8 weeks until our wedding, and I'd got myself all dolled up, ready for this wedding. I was, working out and, looking after myself and feeling really good about myself and wanting to look great. And like my ROCD was like, oh, maybe you've made the wrong partner choice. And then I ended up making a real event mistake. So my ROCD then latched to that ridiculously. And it was almost like, because I was such a perfect person in my eyes, I never made mistakes. I never did anything wrong. I never hurt anyone. It was like, this is proof now. Everything that you worry that you are is true, because you've been worried that you're with the wrong person. You have now actually made a mistake on this night out. Yes, you've run away from it after it happened and fled home and cried and confessed immediately to your husband, and it's all a mess. But this is proof now. Everything's crashing down. And I think I lost 2 or 3 stone in a few weeks because I didn't eat. I literally said to my husband, I will never eat again. And it was just the worst. Like, everything came crashing down. I went to a talking therapist and was like, I need help. I was literally shaking. I was like, I can't function. I can't live. I didn't even know what was wrong. I went in under the guise of like, oh, we've got an issue in our relationship. Can you help us? And then I was like, I need help as well. I've got all these upsetting thoughts. I don't know what's going on with me. And then we basically launched into like, let's diagnose the thoughts. What do they mean? Which was just terrifying. It helped me in the sense that I learned that, it's okay to feel anxiety, and anxiety is a thing, but there was definitely no recognition of OCD at this point. It would be another 3 years until I learned what OCD was. I think 4 years. Yeah, so I would have another 4 years at this point, not even knowing what OCD was, bantering about OCD to people. Oh, I'm so OCD, like I like things organized, and being one of those people that I now think, shut up. And I hope that helps you not be mad at people who say OCD incorrectly, because I did it and I didn't know what it was. So it comes from a place of naivety and not knowing. So then that therapist was out of the picture after a while. And then I had a new therapist who was a CBT therapist who specialised in anxiety, had a bit of OCD experience, and was also around eating as well. So I made some great progress there. We had quite a lot of therapy. And then after a while, so I had a gap in therapy as well. After a while, she said to me, have you ever heard of harm OCD? I was like, what are you talking about? I don't have OCD. And that was a game-changing moment for me, because I realised when I researched harm OCD and then found POCD as well, and ROCD, and all these different things that had been like effectively ruining my life, I thought, I'm going to get better. This is amazing. This is all I needed. And obviously that's not the case. Learning you have OCD is the first step. So I spent quite a lot of time in the it's not me, it's my OCD phase, which helped for a long time. And definitely, it's hard to explain how much knowing you have OCD helps, because I had it for so long without knowing. Like, a lot of people I speak to, they get the symptoms, they see a therapist, they get diagnosed quite soon after, and they know what they're dealing with. Whereas because I lived for so long, not wondering, could this be real? Thinking this is real, because there's no other explanation. I didn't know what OCD was, didn't know what anxiety was. It felt like, oh my gosh, my life improved 70% just by knowing that OCD was a possibility for this, because it was finally an explanation. It was like, this is what it could be. Like, I don't actually believe it is. I think there's something wrong with me, but all the symptoms line up. Oh my gosh, this is the answer I've been waiting for. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking that that would be enough for me. And so, funny thing, as this was going on, I was actually pregnant. I had decided I really wanted a baby. I'd been living in avoidance massively, and I think I'd convinced myself that whatever this weird thing going on in my brain was had gone and everything was great. So I don't know if anyone's experienced this when you're living in chronic avoidance, but you actually can trick your brain that you're better and you think you're completely better, but it's just because you haven't seen any exposures or any triggers at all for so long. So I was like, oh, everything's great. Like, life is great. I know about anxiety. I didn't yet know about OCD. I really want to be a mum. Those weird thoughts I used to get are completely gone. So obviously I'm fine. I was in a bit of denial as well that everything was fine. And I had this natural maternal yearning to be a mum. So I decided to get pregnant, and during that time is when I learned about OCD. So yeah, pretty amazing to learn that I had OCD whilst pregnant, which was my greatest fear, was to have to live with a child. So actually having my daughter, and I now have two daughters, was the best experience of my life, in that I was plunged into the deepest darkness that you could possibly imagine after having my first daughter. It was like everything, every fear I'd ever had just came to the surface, and it was the most terrifying time of my life. I've never known OCD to grip so hard that the world looks black when you wake up. I wonder if that's depression as well, but it was, the guilt hit so bad because my dreams, my nightmares were like terror, like they were like night terrors. Like when I woke up and remembering them, it hit me so hard like a ton of bricks that then I genuinely, the room looked black, and I'd have to just go back to sleep for like maybe the whole day at times and just say, "Oh, I'm so sleep deprived. Can someone look after the baby for a minute?" And it was such a dark time. And so I carried on seeing this therapist, which helped loads because I did loads of exposure work. I didn't avoid my baby. I did everything I needed to in my relationship as well. Got loads better, but still was like ridiculously underweight because I wasn't eating very well. I was doing loads of compulsions in the lead up to exposures. So I wasn't really following plans particularly well. And I don't know if it was being spotted because it wasn't a proper full on specialist I was working with, because there's always people who have experience in OCD versus specialists. I think that maybe certain things weren't getting spotted, like subtle compulsions weren't getting spotted, subtle asking for reassurance wasn't being spotted. And then I genuinely remember, I have a photo of the day it happened, of August or something like that, 2018. I found the OCD Recovery UK or the OCD Recovery Instagram page. And that was like an even bigger moment for me than hearing the words, "Have you heard of OCD?" So that's the Instagram channel that goes with this YouTube channel for Robert Bray. And everything I read was like, that's the missing piece. That's why I'm not getting better. It wasn't like, oh, that's what I'm going through. It was just like, right, it makes sense now. I've been wondering why I'm not getting any better. And I started to learn that everything I'd been doing was spot on, but the missing piece was the unconditional acceptance and the rational thinking piece, which was basically to not dive into thought content on a compulsive basis, but actually to go into the core fears. What is it I'm scared of, and how can I learn to not be scared of it anymore? And so I then decided to I watched videos for ages. I watched or posts or whatever. I can't remember what they were at the time, but I pretty much I think I just cried my eyes out as soon as I found the page, because I was in Italy. I was meant to be on a really nice holiday with the family, but I wasn't eating well. I'd been doing okay. The CBT I'd been having was great, and it was fine, but it wasn't great. I was starting to get to a place where I was just sad. I was sad that this is what life's going to be. I'm fine, I'm functioning, I'm okay, but I'm generally on edge most of the time. And I just thought there must be more. And so finding that page gave me answers, and I started crying. And I was just like this is going to be, there's going to be something better now. And then I eventually decided to have coaching with Rob, and that was brilliant. So I had like check-ins quite regularly at the start to really help me get an understanding of how to apply unconditional acceptance. I read all the books to get that, to understand the psychology of it, and then was guided through how to apply it to my own situation. And at the time I was still seeing my CBT therapist because like I had a great relationship with her. After a while I felt like I didn't need both, so I just stuck with Rob. And yeah, it was like, I would say there was like 8 months of like resistance. This isn't going to work for me, this isn't going to work for me, this isn't going to work for me, there's no point doing this. A lot more exposures than I thought would be needed. So every time I asked, is that enough exposure? It's like, well, if it's still an exposure, then no, it's not enough, because clearly still scared of it. So I was kind of like self-directing a lot of the time as well, and just getting that sort of mentorship of someone who'd already been there, already been through the journey, and was helping me with the tools, resources, books, things that I would need to research and learn for myself. And yeah, it just helped to deal with someone who had already been through exactly what I'd been through. Because I often used to think, when dealing with a therapist, I used to feel like, but you haven't been through this. How can you know what it feels like? It's so hard to explain. And there are specialists in the world who absolutely nail OCD recovery. Of course they do. And they get it, and they really do get it. But I've always struggled with, like, how could you possibly know how I feel and resonate with me if you haven't been there? So that's something I really valued. And yes, I worked tirelessly for 18 months. Mine was so stubborn and so rigid that it just took so much work from me. But every few months, something would unlock a little bit, and I would feel it, like this lightness in my body. And it was just such a nice feeling. And I'll tell you when I knew I was recovered. It's so simple. And for anyone who debates what OCD recovery is and how it feels, it's really easy. The things that used to scare me now bring me joy. It's as simple as that. It's like, if you're still fundamentally scared of something, you're not all the way there, and that's fine. Like, it's good to have made progress. But when people say, oh, recovery for me is that it doesn't impact my life too much, it's like, well, no, that's fine if that's as far as you've got and you're comfortable there for a while. But if you want more, there is more. Because really, when I learned to not be scared of the things I was scared of, I came to this realization that was crystal clear to me, which was, if OCD targets the things we love the most and makes us scared of them, then surely once the fear's gone, they're going to become the best things in our life. Because really, you think about it like that, it's like, if it knows you love your partner and then you can overcome OCD, surely being with your partner becomes brilliant again. And if you've got POCD and you're terrified of being around kids, you know, maybe on some level it's because you're great with kids and they're really important to you, and that's why it's latched there. And so then once you can overcome it, you love being a parent like I do. So for anyone watching who feels hopeless, like, I just want you to have a spring in your step this year and know that as bad as you might be feeling now, you definitely can get better. It starts with the reading list that you can find on ocdrecovery.com. Buy all 5 books, read them all, read them again, get to grips with the basics, watch all of the videos on here, attend some of the webinars to get yourself started, or, you know, talk to your therapist about the concept and have them help you too, because I really believe that unconditional acceptance and rational thinking is game changing for OCD recovery, no matter who you're with. And I think if more therapists can take it on, as I know that some are likely open to it, the better, because then the more people who are doing this with OCD, the better it's going to be. It's becoming like a more common practice, because it is just an extra tool in the toolkit. It's not like some crazy radical thing. It's just all of the things that I've learned about mindfulness, about exposures, about thoughts are just thoughts, leave them alone, you know, no avoidance, everything, all of that stuff is correct. We should be using it in the right ways, but not to a point where it's compulsive, and not to a point where it's like using mindfulness to stop myself feeling anxious. It's like, yeah, being present in life is really good and really important to have a healthy life structure so that OCD most likely doesn't creep in. But meditating for an hour every day to calm the mind so that you don't feel anxious is more of a compulsive use. And then the same with exposure. If we're doing exposures over and over and over again to make ourselves feel better, because when we don't have the response, like, oh, phew, then that's compulsive. So it's a tool in the toolkit that helps those with severe suffering get better again. I know a lot of people who've had anxiety who have read a book, the Paul David At Last Alive book. My friend read that and is like, I'm better. I was like, wow, if only, because she'd been trying everything under the sun, and At Last Alive is just stop trying, leave it alone, and she got better. So it is really about recognizing where we're at and using the tools to apply that are going to work for us. And if you would like to watch more about unconditional self and life acceptance and rational thinking, there are so many videos on this channel. I don't know what happened there. There are so many videos on this channel that will talk to you about that in more detail. And I hope that it was useful for you to hear from me about my journey. I had a huge amount of issues with my eating. I lost so much weight. I had extreme physical sensation problems that felt real. And that was one of the things I battled the most. They go when we don't care about them anymore. So welcome them in, let them be there. live your life irrelevant of what OCD throws at you, whether it be thoughts, urges, sensations. Let them be there, do your thing, and work on the unconditional self and life acceptance and becoming more rational so that you no longer are fearing things that are fueling your OCD. But I think it's really important to highlight that doing this on your own can be really confusing. I really valued having someone to talk to about it to help me not get it wrong, because acceptance isn't agreement. So I struggled for ages to be like, how can I accept the idea of these thoughts being true, of my worst case scenario being true? And it was like, in a nutshell, that's not what we're doing. We're working to have a response the same as someone without OCD would have, which is, I wouldn't want that, but I'm not terrified of it. And I'm not going to live my whole life preventing it from happening in an obsessive compulsive way. And that's where that work really worked for me. So I hope this was useful for you. I do run regular Q&As on here. I am not one of the coaches for the team, but I am a peer person, I guess. So you can ask me anything about my journey and I can share to the best of my knowledge what I went through and answer your questions. So if you have any questions about this video, just comment below. Make sure you give me a like. I'm always trying to get more likes on my videos than, like, say, Nick, for example, because he's really great on his videos. And yeah, it'd be great to have your like, and be sure to subscribe to the channel as well so you don't miss any videos. And I will speak to you soon. Thanks, bye.